Jeremiah Steele's weathered hands gripped the burlap sack tighter as the auctioneer's gavel slammed down with finality. Sold to the mountain man for $37. The crowd jeered and whispered as he stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the trembling figure seated on the auction block. Her hands were bound, her face completely hidden beneath rough brown burlap that had been tied cruelly tight around her neck. The fabric moved with her rapid, panicked breathing. "Doe. Sure about this one? Steele?" called out Mayor Hiram Wickham from the crowd. Nobody else would take her. 3 suitors already rejected her sight unseen after what happened to the Henderson boy. Jeremiah ignored the taunts, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the mysterious woman. Something about her posture, the proud set of her shoulders, despite her obvious terror, stirred something deep in his chest. He'd lived alone in the Colorado mountains for 8 years, trading pelts and avoiding civilization. But loneliness had finally driven him down to Cedar Falls for a mail-order bride auction. "Take the sack off," he commanded, his deep voice cutting through the crowd's chatter. "Now hold on there," interrupted the auctioneer, a sweaty man named Otis Bramwell. "Sales final, no returns. You bought her Aziz, sack and all." "Town rules," I said. "Remove it." Jeremiah's hand moved to the Colt .45 at his hip, the leather holster creaking ominously. The crowd fell silent. Even Mayor Wickham stepped back. Everyone knew of Jeremiah Steele's reputation, a former Army scout who'd survived 3 Indian wars and could track a whisper across stone. His cabin sat high in the Rockies, and few dared venture up those treacherous paths uninvited. "Mr. Steele," pleaded Bramwell, mopping his brow with a dirty handkerchief. "The lady's, well, she's marked, cursed, some say. That's why she wears the sack. For everyone's protection? Cursed how? Nobody rightly knows. She arrived on the morning stage 3 weeks ago with papers saying she was promised to young Timothy Henderson. But when Tim went to lift her veil for their wedding kiss, he took one look at her face and ran screaming from the church. Hasn't spoken a coherent word since. Just rocks back and forth, muttering about eyes like hellfire and the devil's own. Beauty." Jeremiah studied the woman more closely. Despite the crowd's cruel laughter, she hadn't made a sound. No weeping, no begging. Her spine remained straight, her chin tilted up with defiant dignity that reminded him of a wild Mustang, broken but never truly tamed. The second suitor, old Ezra Pritchard, tried to peek under the sack during their engagement dinner, continued Bromwell. Found him the next morning babbling about angels and demons, claiming he'd seen the face of damnation itself. Won't leave his house now. Third, young Dr. Fletcher was convinced it was all superstition. Lasted exactly 1 glimpse before he packed his bags and caught the next train east. Muttering something about beauty too terrible for mortal eyes, Jeremiah approached the auction block slowly, his boots echoing on the wooden platform. The woman's breathing quickened, but she didn't flinch away. If anything, she seemed to lean slightly toward his presence. He knelt beside her, ignoring the crowd's gasps and warnings. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice gentle despite its gravelly tone, "I'm going to take you home now. Will you come willing?" For the first time, she spoke. Her voice was honey-sweet and cultured, with a slight accent he couldn't place. "Do you know what lies beneath this shroud, sir?" "No, ma'am. But I know it can't be worse than 8 years of talking to my horse." Despite everything, she laughed to sound like silver bells that made his heart skip. The wagon ride up the mountain path was treacherous in the best of weather, but the approaching storm made it deadly. Jeremiah's sure hands guided his sturdy draft horses, Bell and Buck, around washouts and fallen timber, while his mysterious bride sat silent beside him, the burlap sack still covering her face. "We'll make camp soon," he said, raising his voice. "Over the howling wind. There's a cave about a mile up where we can wait out the worst of it." She nodded, her bound hands folded carefully in her lap. She'd said nothing since leaving Cedar Falls, though he'd caught her turning her head toward him several times, as if studying him through the coarse fabric. Thunder crashed overhead as they reached the sheltered cave. Jeremiah quickly unhitched the horses and led them inside, then gathered wood for a fire. The woman sat exactly where he'd helped her down from the wagon, unmoving. "You can't be comfortable like that," he said, crouching beside her with his hunting knife drawn. "I'm going to cut the ropes on your hands. Don't see much point in keeping you trussed up like a Christmas goose." Her intake of breath was sharp as the blade sliced through the hemp. She rubbed her wrists gingerly, and he noticed her hands were pale and refined, with long, elegant fingers, not the work-worn hands of a typical frontier bride. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's your name?" he asked, settling across from her by the growing fire. "Magnolia Beauregard." "Whoa, I suspect that name means nothing to you."
Something.
Something in her tone suggested it should. Should it? She was quiet. For a long moment, her head tilted as if listening to the storm. Perhaps it's better that it doesn't. "Tell me, Mr. Steele, that is your name, isn't it? Why did you bid on me? The others were afraid? Maybe I'm too stupid to be scared? I don't think you're stupid at all. Your eyes dot 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 dot." She paused. "Even through this dreadful sack, I can feel the weight of your gaze. You're measuring me, trying to understand what manner of creature you've purchased. You're no creature. You're a woman who's been treated poorly by cowards. How can you be so certain?" Jeremiah poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Known plenty of monsters in my time. They don't usually say please and thank you. They don't sit quiet and dignified when they're being sold like livestock. You might be surprised what monsters are capable of when it serves their purpose. Are you trying to scare me off, Miss Beauregard?" She laughed again, that same musical sound that had stirred something in his chest back in town. "Perhaps. Would save us both considerable trouble. I don't scare easy. So I'm beginning to understand." She was quiet again, then asked, "What do you know of New Orleans, Mr. Steele? Hot, humid, full of folks who talk fancy and think they're better than mountain people. I was AM from New Orleans. My father was Beauregard, owner of the largest sugar plantation in Louisiana before the war." Jeremiah's hands stilled. On his stick, even he'd heard that name. The Beauregard plantation, heard tell it was burned during the war. "By my father's own hand," she said quietly. "Rather than let the Union forces claim it, we lost everything. The land, the house, the fortune. What we didn't lose to war, we lost to carpetbaggers and taxes afterward. So you came west looking for a fresh start, not by choice."
I was
Encouraged to leave New Orleans rather suddenly. There was an incident at a society ball. A young man died. The cave fell silent except for the crackling fire and the storm outside. Jeremiah studied her carefully, noting how she held herself like nobility fallen on hard times, but clinging to dignity. "Did you kill him?" In a manner of speaking. Her voice was barely audible, though I never laid a hand on him. "How does that work?" She turned toward him then, and even through the burlap he could feel the intensity of her hidden gaze. "Have you ever heard tales of women whose beauty was so terrible, so overwhelming, that men died merely from looking upon them?" "Sounds like something from one of those penny novels." "Perhaps. But consider this: 3 men have looked upon my face since I arrived in your charming town. All 3 were ... changed, damaged, you might say." Lightning illuminated the cave entrance, and in that brief, stark light, Jeremiah saw something that made his breath catch. The burlap sack, dampened by rain, had become slightly transparent, revealing the shadow of delicate features beneath. "What happened in New Orleans?" he asked. "I attended the midsummer ball as I had every year since my debut. But this time, when young Beaumont the Bodo asked me to dance, I was ... angry. Furious, really. He'd spread rumors about my family's financial ruin, made crude jokes about fallen Southern belles. So, when he insisted on stealing a kiss in the garden, I let him look at me. Really look. And his heart simply ... stopped. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cave, an odd peace settled between them. Jeremiah had given Magnolia his bedroll and taken the hard ground for himself, though sleep eluded him. Her story haunted his thoughts, not because he believed in curses or supernatural beauty, no, but because he recognized the pain beneath her measured words. Near dawn, he was awakened by a soft sound. She was crying quiet, dignified tears that she tried to muffle against the rough fabric of the sack. "Can't sleep either?" asked gently. I keep thinking about that young man in town, Timothy Henderson. He was so young, so eager to start his life with a bride. I've ruined him, just as I ruined poor Beaumont. Jeremiah sat up, his joints protesting the cold stone floor. From what I heard, Timothy Henderson was known for running his mouth about things he didn't understand. Maybe what he saw wasn't your face, maybe it was his own ugly soul reflected back at him. You're very kind, Mr. Steele, but kindness won't change what I am. What you are is a woman who's been told lies about herself for so long you've started believing them. She turned toward him, and again he caught that sense of being studied by hidden eyes. How can you be so certain I'm not exactly what they say? How do you know I won't be the death of you as well? 'Cause I've looked death in the eye more times than I can count, and it never wore a lady's dress or spoke with a cultured accent. The first pale light of dawn was creeping into the cave. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the mountain air clean and sharp. Jeremiah stood and began packing their meager supplies. Time to go home, he said. Home. She spoke the word like she was tasting something foreign. Haven't had a real home since before the war. It's not much, just a cabin and some outbuildings. Ow. But it's solid and warm, and there's nobody around for miles to whisper about curses or beauty that kills. As they resumed their journey up the mountain path, Magnolia seemed to relax slightly. Her posture remained dignified, but she began asking questions about the wilderness around them. Her curiosity was intelligent and genuine. She wanted to know about the plants they passed, the animal tracks in the mud, the way he read the weather from cloud formations. You've got a good mind, he observed after she made a particularly astute comment about how altitude affected the tree line. My father insisted on educating his daughters as thoroughly as his sons. He said ignorance was the only true disability. Man he was, until the war broke him. Her voice grew soft. He changed after we lost my brother at Gettysburg. Became obsessed with honor and legacy and preserving what little we had left. When the incident happened at the ball, he was the one who suggested I might be ... cursed. Said it explained why suitors always seemed to come to bad ends around me. Maybe you just had high standards, she laughed, but it was bitter now. Perhaps. Or perhaps watching my family lose everything made me angry enough to kill with a look. They crested a ridge and Jeremiah's homestead came into view, a sturdy log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. Several outbuildings and a corral where 2 horses grazed peacefully. It was simple, but well maintained, carved from the wilderness. Through years of hard work. Oh, Magnolia breathed. It's beautiful. It's not fancy. No, it's perfect. It looks like peace. Something in her voice made his chest tighten. When had anyone ever called his rough mountain home perfect? As they approached the cabin, his neighbor, Josiah Crow, emerged from the barn where he'd been tending the animals. Josiah was a half-Cherokee mountain man who lived in a cabin about 5 miles north. Despite his fierce appearance, scarred face, long black hair streaked with gray, and arms like tree trunks, he had a gentle soul and was one of the few people Jeremiah trusted completely. Wondered when you'd be back, Josiah said, his dark eyes taking in the mysterious woman beside Jeremiah. Brought company, I see. My wife, Jeremiah said simply. Magnolia? This is Josiah Crow. He keeps an eye on things when I'm away. Ma'am. Josiah nodded respectfully, though his eyes lingered curiously on the burlap sack. If he found it strange, he was too polite to comment. Mr. Crow, Magnolia replied with perfect manners. I'll leave you to get settled, Josiah said too. Jeremiah, but you might want to know had some visitors while you were gone. 3 men from town, asking questions about your business and making noise about curses and devils. Jeremiah's jaw tightened. What kind of noise? The kind that suggests they might not be content to let sleeping dogs lie. They seemed powerful. Interested in your new bride, and not in a neighborly way. As Josiah departed with promises to check on them soon, Jeremiah helped Magnolia down from the wagon. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched his arm for balance. They followed us, she said quietly. I should have known they would. Some men can't bear the thought of a mystery they can't solve. Let them come, Jeremiah said grimly. got a way of discouraging unwanted visitors. He led her inside the cabin, noting how she moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb anything. The interior was spartanly furnished, but clean, a stone fireplace, handmade furniture, shelves lined with books and windows that let in the mountain light. "You read?" she observed, approaching his bookshelf. "Long winters, gets lonely without something to occupy the mind." She ran her fingers along the spines: Shakespeare, Dickens, philosophy texts, journals on natural history. "Oh, my father would have approved of your library, Magnolia," he said quietly. "We need to talk about that sack." She froze, her hands still on a volume of poetry. "I know," Magnolia whispered, her voice barely audible, "but I'm afraid of me, of disappointing you, of seeing the same look in your eyes that I saw in the others." She turned from the bookshelf, her hands clasped tightly together. "You've been so kind, so different from anyone I've ever known. I couldn't bear it if you looked at me with horror." Jeremiah moved closer, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. "What if I told you it didn't matter what you look like? You'd be lying. It always matters, not to me." "How can you say that when you haven't seen?" "Because I've been watching you for 2 days now. I've seen how you sit straight even when you're terrified. How you say please and thank you even to a man who bought you like livestock. How you ask thoughtful questions and really listen to the answers. That tells me more about who you are than any face ever could." She was quiet for a long moment, her hidden face turned toward the window where afternoon light streamed through. "In New Orleans, before everything changed, I was considered ... striking. Not conventionally pretty, but arresting. Men would cross rooms to ask for an introduction. Women would whisper behind their fans. And that's a curse. How? 'Cause after my brother died, and we lost everything, that attention became ... different. Hungry, desperate men who thought a beautiful woman from a ruined family would be grateful for any offer, no matter how degrading." Her voice grew hard. "I learned to use their weakness against them, to let them see exactly what they deserved to see." Which was what? Their own greed, their own corruption, their own dark desires, reflected back at them magnified tenfold. She moved to the window, her fingers tracing the glass. "Some men, when confronted with their true nature, simply ... break." Jeremiah considered this understanding dawning. "You're not cursed, you're just able to see through people, and they can't handle it. Perhaps. But the effect is the same. Young Beaumont died. Timothy Henderson lost his mind. Dr. Fletcher fled the territory. And now, 3 more men are riding up your mountain with God knows what intentions." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the valley below. Jeremiah moved to the window and peered down the winding trail. 3 riders were indeed making their way up the treacherous path, their horses laboring against the steep grade. "Mayor Wickham," he identified grimly. "And that looks like Sheriff Dalton with him. Can't make out the third." "They've come to take me back," Magnolia said with resignation. "To put me on trial for witchcraft or worse. It's better this way, Mr. Steele. You'll be free of whatever curse follows me." "Like hell." Jeremiah moved to his gun rack and pulled down a Winchester rifle, checking the load with practiced efficiency. "Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. You don't understand. If they see my face, then don't let them see it." He turned to her, his steel-gray eyes blazing with determination. "This is your home now, Magnolia, our home. And I don't let bullies run roughshod over what's mine, yours." The word came out as a whisper. "If you'll have it so. I know we barely know each other, and Lord knows I'm not much of a catch. Just a broken-down old scout with more scars than sense. But I meant what I said at the auction. I want you to stay. Not because of what you might look like under that sack, but because in 2 days you've made this place feel more like home than it has in 8 years." Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Jeremiah positioned himself by the door, rifle ready but held low. Through the window, they could see the 3 riders approaching the cabin, Mayor Wickham on his bay gelding, Sheriff Dalton on a sturdy roan, and bringing up the rear, a man in an expensive suit riding a nervous thoroughbred. "Stay back from the windows," Jeremiah instructed quietly. The riders pulled up in the yard, their horses snorting and stamping from the hard climb. Mayor Wickham, A pompous man with a belly that strained his vest buttons, dismounted with obvious difficulty. "Steele," we called out. "We need to talk." Jeremiah stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled casually in his arms. "Afternoon, Hiram. Sheriff. Don't believe I know your friend there." The third man dismounted with fluid grace. He was younger than the others, perhaps 30, with carefully styled dark hair and pale aristocratic features. His clothes were expensive, a tailored coat, polished boots, and a gold watch chain that caught the sunlight. "Allow me to introduce myself," the stranger said in a cultured southern accent that made Magnolia gasp from inside the cabin. "I am Beaumont Thibodeau, Jr., and I've come a very long way to reclaim my property." The bottom dropped out of Jeremiah's stomach. He'd heard that name before from Magnolia's own lips. This was the son of the man who'd supposedly died looking at her face in New Orleans. "Don't know what you're talking about," Jeremiah said carefully. "Oh, I think you do," Thibodeau smiled, but it was cold as winter steel. "You see, Mr. Steele? The woman you purchased yesterday is a thief and a murderess. She killed my father with some unholy power, then fled New Orleans with a considerable sum of money that belonged to my family. That's a serious accusation." "Indeed it is. Which is why I've spent the better part of 6 months tracking her across half the country." He gestured to his companions. "These gentlemen have graciously agreed to assist me in bringing her back to Louisiana to face justice." A weathered man with kind eyes, who looked uncomfortable with the whole business, spoke up. "Now, Steele, I don't like this any more than you do, but Mr. Thibodeau here has papers warrants from Louisiana authorities. Says the woman's wanted for theft and ... well, murder. And I suppose you've come to collect her." "I'm afraid so," Wickham said, puffing out his chest importantly. "It's our civic duty to uphold the law, even way up here in the mountains." Jeremiah's grip on the rifle shifted slightly. "Funny thing about civic duty, Hiram. It doesn't seem to extend to protecting folks from lynch mobs or treating women with basic human decency." "She's not human," Thibodeau snapped, his composure cracking. "She's some kind of demon, a succubus. Sent to destroy good men? She killed my father with nothing but a look." "Your father died of a weak heart," Jeremiah replied evenly. "I checked the New Orleans newspapers while I was in town yesterday. Beaumont Thibodeau Sr. died of cardiac failure at a society ball. No mention of murder or supernatural causes." Thibodeau's face flushed red. "She bewitched him, used some unholy power. What she used was the ability to see through his lies and call him out on them. Some men can't handle the truth about themselves." From inside the cabin came a sound, the rustle of fabric, soft footsteps on wooden floor. Magnolia was moving toward the door. "Don't," Jeremiah called over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off the 3 men in his yard. But it was too late. The cabin door opened with a soft creak, and Magnolia stepped onto the porch beside him. She still wore the burlap sack over her head, but her posture radiated a quiet dignity that seemed to make the very air around her shimmer with tension. "Hello, Beaumont," she said softly, her honeyed voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I wondered when you'd finally work up the courage to face me." Thibodeau Jr. went pale as milk, his hand instinctively moving to what looked like a cross hanging from his neck. "Cover your face, demon. Won't be taken in by your unholy beauty as my father was." "Your father wasn't taken in by anything," Magnolia replied calmly. "He simply couldn't live with what he saw when he looked in the mirror I held." "Up to his soul? She admits it," Wickham exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger. She admits to using witchcraft." "I admit to nothing more than the ability to see people as they truly are," Magnolia said, "and to reflect that truth back at them. If men die from that reflection, perhaps the problem lies not with the mirror, but with what it reveals." "Sheriff." Dalton shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification. Mr. Thibodeau here claims you're Magnolia Beauregard, wanted for theft and murder in Louisiana." "I am indeed Magnolia Beauregard, but I am neither a thief nor a murderess." "Then you'll come back with us willingly," Thibodeau said, his voice gaining confidence. "You'll stand trial and face justice for what you've done." "Justice?" Magnolia's laugh was like broken glass. What justice was there for my family when your father's business partners stripped us of everything we owned? What justice was there when those same men offered to help a ruined belle by making her their mistress? My father never your father offered me $200 to become his plaything, Beaumont. When I refused, he spread rumors that I was cursed, that I brought bad luck to any man who courted me. He systematically destroyed my reputation to punish me for rejecting his advances. Lies, are they? Magnolia stepped forward, and even through the rough burlap, her presence seemed to fill the entire yard. Shall I remove this sack, Beaumont? Shall I let you see what your father saw? The truth of what he was, reflected in eyes that couldn't lie. No. Thibodeau stumbled backward, his face a mask of terror. Keep that thing covered. I won't let you bewitch me as you did him. Jeremiah had heard enough. He raised the Winchester, the barrel pointing directly at Thibodeau's chest. I think you gentlemen had better head back down the mountain now. You're obstructing justice. Steele Wickham blustered, but his voice shook. I'm protecting my wife. From men who want to lynch her for the crime of making them uncomfortable, Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat diplomatically. Now, Jeremiah, I understand your feelings here, but the law's the law. If this lady's wanted in Louisiana, then let Louisiana come get her with proper federal marshals and real warrants. Jeremiah cut him off. Not some vengeful son and a bunch of papers that could be forged by any printer with decent handwriting. Thibodeau's face twisted with rage. You don't understand what you're protecting? She's not human. She's some kind of monster that feeds on men's souls. The only monster I see here is the man trying to drag a woman back to face a lynch mob. Magnolia placed a gentle hand on Jeremiah's arm. It's all right, she said quietly. Perhaps it's time they saw the truth. Before anyone could stop her, her hands moved to the rope that tied the burlap sack around her neck. Don't look. Thibodeau screamed, covering his eyes like a child afraid of lightning. Whatever you do, don't look at her face. Sheriff Dalton and Mayor Wickham, however, were transfixed. As the rough sack fell away, they found themselves staring at a woman whose beauty was indeed terrible, not because it was monstrous, but because it was so pure, so perfect, that it seemed to illuminate every flaw in the world around it. Magnolia Beauregard stood revealed at last. Her hair was midnight black, tumbling in waves to her waist. Her skin was pale as moonlight, flawless as carved marble. But it was her eyes that held them large, luminous, and filled with such profound sadness and wisdom that looking into them was like staring into the depths of human experience itself. Mayor Wickham made a strangled sound and swayed in his saddle. Sheriff Dalton simply stared, tears beginning to stream down his weathered cheeks. But Jeremiah looked at her and saw something entirely different. He saw intelligence and strength. He saw pain that had been transformed into compassion. He saw a woman who had been forced to hide her light because others couldn't bear its brightness. My God, he whispered, but not in fear. In wonder, Magnolia turned to him, her extraordinary eyes searching his face anxiously. Do you see it now? The curse? The terrible beauty that destroys men? I see a woman who's been told she's dangerous because she makes others feel inadequate by comparison. He reached out slowly and touched her cheek with rough, gentle fingers. You're not cursed, darling. You're magnificent. Her breath caught at his touch, at the complete absence of fear or revulsion in his eyes. This is impossible, Thibodeau snarled from behind his hands.
Look at her, really look. See the demon that destroyed my father?
Sheriff Dalton finally found his voice.
I've been looking, son.
All I see is a lady who's been treated poorly by men who were intimidated by her strength.
She bewitched you, Thibodeau raged. No, Dalton said quietly, wiping the tears from his eyes. She just made me remember what it felt like to be ashamed of the kind of man I've become. When I look at her, I see every cruel word I've ever spoken. Every time I've turned my back on someone who needed help. Every moment I've chosen comfort over doing what's right. Mayor Wickham was nodding slowly, his face pale but no longer terrified. She's a mirror, he said wonderingly. A perfect mirror that shows us who we really are inside. No. Thibodeau's voice cracked with desperation. You're all bewitched. Can't you see she's a demon sent to destroy us? But his companions were no longer listening. Sheriff Dalton had dismounted and was approaching the porch slowly. His hat in his hands, his weathered face creased with something between pain and gratitude. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I came here to drag you back to face charges that I now realize are nothing but the revenge of a man who couldn't face his own weakness." Sheriff Thibodeau began frantically. "No." Dalton's voice carried the authority of his badge. "I've been a lawman for 23 years, and I've learned to recognize the difference between justice and revenge. What you want isn't justice, Mr. Thibodeau. It's just the continuation of your father's cruelty." Mayor Wickham nodded slowly, though his face was still pale from the shock of seeing his own nature reflected so clearly. I think we should head back to town. This lady hasn't committed any crime in Colorado territory. I'm not inclined to help Louisiana settle old scores based on superstition and spite. You can't leave." Thibodeau screamed, finally lowering his hands but keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the ground. "She's a witch. A demon. She must be stopped." "The only thing that needs to be stopped," Jeremiah said coldly, "is you. Get off my land. Now." "This isn't over," Thibodeau snarled, backing toward his horse while keeping his face averted. "There. Are others in New Orleans who know what she is? We'll come for her eventually. Let them come." Jeremiah's voice was steel and stone. "They'll find I'm not as easily intimidated as the men in your fine city." Thibodeau mounted his nervous thoroughbred, still refusing to look directly at Magnolia. Sheriff Dalton approached the porch one more time. "Mrs. Steele," he said formally, "you have my word as an officer of the law that you won't be troubled by any more visits from Louisiana bounty hunters, not as long as I wear this badge." "Thank you, Sheriff," Magnolia replied, her voice soft with genuine gratitude. After the three men had departed, Wickham and Dalton riding together in thoughtful silence, Thibodeau spurring his horse ahead as if fleeing from demons. Jeremiah and Magnolia stood alone on the porch as evening settled over the mountains. "So," he said quietly, studying her face in the golden light of sunset, "this is what all the fuss was about." She tensed, waiting for the change she was certain must come, the moment when he would see her as others did, something too bright, too perfect, too overwhelming for comfort. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "But then, I suspected you would. Be. That's all? Just ... beautiful? Well, no." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "You're also stubborn, intelligent, brave, and kind. The beauty's just the wrapping paper." Tears spilled down her cheeks, tears of relief, of wonder, of a lifetime of fear finally beginning to dissolve. "How can you look at me and not see what the others saw? Because I'm not looking for a reflection of myself. I'm looking at you," brushed away her tears with gentle fingers. "The men who couldn't handle your face weren't really seeing you at all. They were seeing their own inadequacies magnified and reflected back at them. But when I look at you, I just see the woman who asked thoughtful questions on our way up the mountain. The woman who said thank you when I cut her bonds. The woman who tried to warn me away to protect me from whatever curse she thought she carried. And you're not. Frightened? Overwhelmed? Only by the thought of how lonely I was before you came here." He took her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit together. "Magnolia Beauregard Steele, will you do me the honor of staying married to me? Really married, not just bought at auction?" Her answer was a kiss-off, tentative at first, then deeper as she realized he wasn't going to shatter at her touch. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Jeremiah Steele, I'll stay." As if the mountain itself approved, a nightingale began to sing from the pine trees, its melody carrying across the valley like a benediction. 3 months passed like a golden dream. Magnolia threw herself into making the mountain cabin a true home, her refined touch evident in every corner. She planted a garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the rocky soil with patience and skill. She mended Jeremiah's clothes, organized his books, and filled the long winter evenings with stories of her childhood in Louisiana. But more than that, she filled the silence that had been Jeremiah's only companion for 8 lonely years. They talked about everything: books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. She proved to be as intelligent as he'd suspected, discussing philosophy and natural science with the kind of educated insight that came from real learning, not mere social training. "You're wasted up here," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, she with her needlework and he with a book of poetry she'd introduced him to. "Wasted how?" She looked up from the shirt she was mending, her extraordinary eyes reflecting the firelight. "You could be in some fine city, attending salons and discussing literature with professors. Instead, you're darning socks for a rough mountain man." She set down her needle and moved to the chair beside his, taking his scarred hands in her smooth ones. "Jeremiah Steele, do you know what my life was like in New Orleans? Even before the war? Even when we had money and status? Tell me." "Empty. I was a beautiful ornament in my father's house. Expected to smile prettily and marry well and produce beautiful children to carry on the family name. No one cared what I thought about anything. No one asked my opinion on books or philosophy or the natural world. I was valued only for my appearance and my ability to reflect well on my family's reputation." She traced the old scar that ran from his knuckle to his wrist, a memento from his army days. "But you listen when I talk about the books I'm reading. You ask what I think about the way the seasons change up here in the mountains. Value my mind as much as other things. Other things." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirking up. She blushed prettily. "You know very well what I mean." He did know. Their marriage had become real in every sense over the past months. What had begun as protection and companionship had deepened into genuine love, passionate, tender, and completely mutual. She was as eager for his touch as he was for hers, and their nights together had been a revelation for both of them. "I love you," she said simply. "Not because you're not afraid of my face, but because you see all of me and love all of me. That's rarer than any beauty, Jeremiah." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed up from the valley. They both tensed. Visitors were rare in winter and usually meant trouble. "Expecting anyone?" Magnolia asked, already moving toward the window. "No." Jeremiah was already reaching for his rifle. "Stay away from the windows until we know who it is." The riders came slowly up the treacherous winter path, their horses picking their way carefully through patches of ice and snow in the moonlight. Jeremiah could make out 4 figures too many to be a friendly visit from Josiah Crow. As they drew closer, his blood ran cold. He recognized the lead rider's silhouette. Beaumont Thibodeau Jr. returned with reinforcements. "It's Thibodeau," he said grimly. "He's brought friends." Magnolia went pale, but lifted her chin with familiar defiance. "How many?" "For total." "All armed from the look of it." The riders pulled up in the yard, their breath steaming in the cold air. Thibodeau dismounted first, followed by 3 hard-looking men who had the bearing of professional gunfighters. Their leader was a tall, lean man with pale eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, the kind of man who killed for money and slept soundly afterward. "Steele," Thibodeau called out. I've come to make you an offer." Jeremiah stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "Same answer as before. Get off my land. Now, let's be civilized about this." The pale-eyed gunfighter spoke with a slight accenturish perhaps. "Mr. Thibodeau here has made me a very generous offer to resolve this situation peacefully. You are Connor O'Malley at your service. I specialize in difficult retrievals." His smile was cold as winter steel. "Mr. Thibodeau wishes to engage my services to transport a certain lady back to Louisiana to face justice. She's not going anywhere." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, my friend." O'Malley's hand rested casually on his gun, but, you see, I've brought along some federal warrants this time. All proper and legal, signed by a judge in New Orleans." He pulled out an official-looking document and waved it in the air. "Murder warrant for one Magnolia Beauregard, wanted in connection with the death of Beaumont Thibodeau Sr. and 3 other gentlemen who died under mysterious circumstances." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. Those warrants are as fake as the ones Thibodeau brought before, perhaps. But they look real enough to satisfy any territorial judge, should this matter come to court. And I think you'll find that fighting federal marshals, which is what will claim to be carries some rather serious Penalties. From inside the cabin, Magnolia's voice carried clearly, "What do you want, O'Malley?" "Ah, the lady herself. Good evening, Miss Beauregard. I want nothing more than to resolve this matter to everyone's satisfaction. Mr. Thibodeau is prepared to be quite reasonable, meaning, Thibodeau called out, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "that I'll withdraw all charges against you if you agree to return the money you stole from my family estate." "Money?" Magnolia appeared in the doorway beside Jeremiah, her face uncovered, her beauty shining like starlight in the winter darkness. O'Malley's three companions shifted uncomfortably, avoiding looking directly at her, but O'Malley himself seemed unaffected. His pale eyes studied her with professional interest, like a man appraising valuable merchandise. "The $50,000 in gold and securities that disappeared from my father's safe the night he died," Thibodeau said, still keeping his own gaze fixed on the ground. "I never took anything from your father except the clothes on my back when I fled your city." "Lies. The money disappeared that very night, and you were the only one who had access to his private study. I was never alone. With your father, Beaumont. There were always servants present, witnesses to every conversation. Witnesses who have since disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances," O'Malley interjected smoothly. "Rather convenient, don't you think?" Jeremiah's finger tightened on the rifle's trigger. "Convenient for someone, but not for her. Sounds to me like someone's been cleaning up loose ends to frame an innocent woman." O'Malley's smile never wavered. Such a romantic notion. "But I'm afraid the evidence is quite damning. Unless, of course, the lady can produce the missing funds and clear her name. And if she can't, then I'm afraid we'll have to escort her back to Louisiana to stand trial. Dead or alive, as the warrant specifies." The threat hung in the winter air like ice crystals. Jeremiah raised his rifle, the barrel pointing directly at O'Malley's chest. "Over. My dead body." "That," O'Malley said pleasantly, "can certainly be arranged." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. 4 armed men in the yard, 2 defenders on the porch, and the winter night pressing close around them all. Jeremiah could feel Magnolia's tension beside him, could sense her preparing to do something desperate. "There's another option," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the frigid air. "Magnolia—" "No," Jeremiah began, but she stepped forward. "What if I told you the money never existed?" She called out to Thibodeau. "What if your father's fortune was nothing but debts and empty promises, just like my family's was?" "Impossible," Thibodeau snarled. "My father was a wealthy man. Your father was bankrupt, Beaumont. He'd been living on borrowed money and false credit for years, trying to maintain appearances. When he died, his creditors came calling, didn't. They found nothing but empty safes and worthless paper." O'Malley's eyes sharpened with interest. "Go on. So you needed a scapegoat. Someone to blame for the missing fortune. And what better target than the cursed woman who supposedly killed him with a look? Pin the theft on her, collect the insurance money, and everyone's satisfied." "That's a fascinating theory," O'Malley said slowly, "but it doesn't change the facts. There are warrants, there are witnesses, and there's a substantial reward for your capture. Witnesses you've paid or threatened into cooperation," Jeremiah said grimly. "Perhaps, but money spends. The same regardless of its source." O'Malley's hand moved closer to his gun. "Now, shall we do this the easy way or the hard way?" Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through the night. "I'd suggest the smart way." Josiah Crow materialized from the shadows like a vengeful spirit, his rifle trained on O'Malley's back. Behind him came 3 more figures, mountain men, who'd answered some silent call for help. "Evening, Jeremiah," Josiah said calmly, never taking his eyes off the gunfighters. "Heard you might have some unwelcome visitors." "Josiah." Relief flooded Jeremiah's voice. "Gentlemen, meet some of my neighbors. They take a dim view of outsiders, threatening folks on their mountain." O'Malley's confidence wavered slightly as he realized they were now outnumbered and outgunned. His 3 companions looked nervously between the rifles pointed at them from multiple directions. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man," O'Malley said to Josiah. "When someone threatens my neighbor's wife on my mountain, it concerns me plenty." Josiah's voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. See, we've got our own law up here, and it says a man's got a right to protect his family. From claim jumpers and bounty hunters, we have legal warrants. You have pieces of paper that might fool a city judge, but don't mean spit up here. Another mountain man stepped forward, Caleb Morrison. A grizzled veteran who'd been trapping these peaks since before the war. Way. I see it. You're trespassing on private land with intent to commit kidnapping. Thibodeau's nerve finally broke. Just shoot them, he screamed at O'Malley. Kill them all and take the witch. But O'Malley was too experienced to start a gunfight he couldn't win. His pale eyes calculated odds and angles, counting rifles and exits. Whatever he saw didn't improve his mood. This isn't over, he said finally. There's too much money at stake to let one stubborn mountain man stand in the way. Then you'll have to go through all of us, Josiah replied evenly. And I should mention we know these mountains like, city streets. Lots of places. A man could disappear up here. Lots of ravines where bodies might never be found. The threat was delivered in the same tone another man might use to discuss the weather. But its sincerity was unmistakable. O'Malley's companions shifted nervously, clearly having second thoughts about their employment. Mount up, O'Malley ordered curtly. We're leaving. But the money, Thibodeau began. We'll have to wait for better circumstances. O'Malley swung into his saddle, his cold eyes never leaving Magnolia's face. Until next time, Miss Beauregard. As the four riders disappeared back down the mountain path, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the winter night, Jeremiah finally lowered his rifle. Thank you, he said to Josiah and the others. Don't mention it. That's what neighbors do. Josiah studied Magnolia with frank curiosity. So this is the lady who's got everyone so worked up. Josiah Crow, Jeremiah said formally. Meet my wife. Magnolia, ma'am. Josiah touched his hat brim respectfully. Heard tell you were cursed with terrible beauty that drives men mad. Magnolia smiled despite the tension of the night. So they say, well, you're certainly beautiful enough. But the only thing terrible about it is how some men can't handle a woman who's prettier than they deserve. He grinned, showing white teeth against his weathered face. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she always said that true beauty comes from the spirit within. Yours shines pretty bright, Mrs. Steele. They'll be back, Caleb Morrison observed, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. That O'Malley fellow has the look of a man who doesn't give up easy. Let them come, Jeremiah said grimly. This is our home, and we'll defend it. You won't be defending it alone, Josiah promised. Word will spread among the mountain folk. Anyone who threatens you or your wife will have to answer to all of us. After their neighbors departed with promises to keep watch for more unwelcome visitors, Jeremiah and Magnolia sat by their fire, holding each other close. I'm sorry, she whispered against his chest. I've brought nothing but trouble into your peaceful life. You've brought love and joy and laughter, he corrected firmly. The trouble isn't your fault. It's the fault of greedy, evil men who can't stand seeing others happy. But Thibodeau won't give up. Neither will O'Malley, not with so much money at stake. Then we'll have to make sure they don't get another chance to threaten you. She pulled back to look at him. What do you mean? I mean, it's time to end this once and for all. We're going to New Orleans. Jeremiah? No. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than sitting here waiting for them to come back with an army? He stroked her midnight hair gently. Sometimes the only way to stop running from the past is to turn around and face it head on. But if we go back there, if we walk into their territory, we'll do it on our terms, not theirs. And we'll have the truth on our side. The truth didn't save your father or protect me from being run out of the city. That's because you were alone then. This time you'll have me. Spring came early that year, melting the mountain snows and opening the passes sooner than expected. By April, Jeremiah and Magnolia were ready to make their journey to New Orleans, but not as fugitives or victims. They traveled as investigators, armed with letters of introduction from territorial officials and accompanied by a federal marshal named Samuel Hayes, who'd taken a personal interest in the case after hearing about the forged warrants. Marshal Hayes was a lean, thoughtful man in his 50s who'd built his reputation on methodical investigation rather than quick draws. He listened carefully to Magnolia's story during their long journey south, asking probing questions and taking detailed notes. "The more I hear," he said as their train pulled into New Orleans, "the more this sounds like a complex fraud scheme. If young Thibodeau is trying to collect insurance money on a fortune that never existed, he'd need documentation to prove the theft. Documentation that would require considerable forgery. The New Orleans they found was a city still recovering from war and reconstruction, its former grandeur now faded and shabby around the edges. But it remained beautiful in a melancholy way, with its wrought iron balconies and ancient oak trees. Draped in Spanish moss, Magnolia had tensed as they entered the city, but walking the familiar streets with Jeremiah's steady presence beside her, she found her courage returning. She was no longer the desperate young woman who'd fled in shame. 3 years ago, she was Mrs. Jeremiah Steele now, with a home and a husband who loved her, and that knowledge armored her against old fears. Their first stop was the office of Beaumont Thibodeau Sr.'s former attorney, a nervous little man named Percival Fontaine, who nearly fainted when Magnolia walked into his office. "You," he gasped, clutching his chest. "But you're supposed to be, that is. Young Beaumont said you were dead," Magnolia suggested pleasantly. "Or captured by bounty hunters? I am sorry to disappoint him." Marshal Hayes showed his badge. "Mr. Fontaine, I'm investigating charges of fraud and conspiracy related to the Thibodeau estate. I need to see all financial records from the time of Mr. Thibodeau Sr.'s death. I'm not sure I can. That is, client privilege." "Mr. Thibodeau Sr. is dead," Hayes pointed out patiently, "and his son has made public accusations of theft. That rather removes any claim to privilege, don't you think?" The records told a damning story. Beaumont Thibodeau Sr. had indeed been bankrupt, his plantation mortgaged to the hilt, and his business is failing. But more interesting were the insurance. Substantial policies that would pay out handsomely. If his death was ruled murder and the supposed stolen money was never recovered, young Beaumont took out these policies just 2 months before his father's death, Fontaine admitted reluctantly. He said it was to protect the family fortune against theft. It's very prescient of him. Marshal Hayes observed dryly. Their next stop was the morgue, where the coroner who'd examined Thibodeau Sr. still worked. Dr. Marcus Webb was a precise scientific man who kept meticulous records. Heart failure, he confirmed, showing them the death certificate. Massive cardiac arrest, probably brought on by excitement and too much rich food. The man was 50 pounds overweight and had been showing symptoms of heart disease for years. Signs of poison? No evidence of foul play? None whatsoever. Young Beaumont insisted I look for signs of supernatural influence, wanted me to write death by witchcraft on the certificate. If you can believe it. I told him this was 1876, not 1676, and we don't blame heart attacks on supernatural causes. But it was their visit to the servants' quarters behind the old Thibodeau mansion that provided the most damning evidence. They found Celestine Dubois, elderly housekeeper who'd worked for the family for 30 years, living in a cramped room and working for almost nothing. Miss Magnolia. "How?" she exclaimed when she saw her, tears streaming down her dark face. "Child, I thought you was dead. Young Master Beaumont said terrible men had killed you. I'm very much alive, Celestine, and I need your help." The old woman's story unfolded slowly, but it painted a clear picture of the night Beaumont Thibodeau Sr. died. Yes, he'd been agitated after his encounter with Magnolia at the ball, but not from supernatural terror, from rage at being publicly humiliated by a woman he'd tried to coerce into becoming his mistress. He came home ranting and raving, Celestine recalled. Said he was going to ruin that Beauregard girl for making him look like a fool. Spent hours in his study, writing letters to other gentlemen, spreading lies about her. Got himself so worked up his face turned purple. What happened then? Young Master Beaumont came in the sun, you understand? They had a terrible fight. About money, about debts, about what was going to happen to the family name. The old master, he started clutching his chest, gasping for air. I wanted to call for a doctor, but young Master Beaumont, he told me to wait in the kitchen. How long? Did you wait? Maybe an hour? When I finally went back to check, the old master was dead, and young Master Beaumont was going through the safe. Said robbers had broken in, that they'd stolen everything and killed his father. But you saw no robbers? No child? Just young Master Beaumont with his father's papers and that wild look in his eyes. Marshal Hayes took careful notes, building a case that would hold up in federal court. But Magnolia had one more stop to make: the cemetery where Beaumont Thibodeau Sr. was buried. They found young Beaumont there, standing before his father's elaborate tomb with tears streaming down his face. He looked older than his years, worn down by guilt and desperation. "I wondered when you'd come," he said without turning around. "It's over, Beaumont," Magnolia said gently. "We know the truth about your father's death, about the missing money. That never existed, about the insurance fraud." "He died because of you," Thibodeau said brokenly. "Maybe not by witchcraft, but because of you just the same. If you hadn't humiliated him at the ball, if you'd just accepted his offer quietly, if your father died because he couldn't control his temper or his appetite," Marshal Hayes said firmly, "and you compounded that tragedy by trying to frame an innocent woman to cover your own crimes." Beaumont finally turned to face them, and Magnolia was shocked by the change in him. The arrogant young man who'd terrorized her on the mountain was gone, replaced by someone hollow-eyed and haunted. "I needed the money," he whispered. "The debts, the creditors. They would have taken everything. The family name, the reputation. I couldn't let that happen." "So you decided to destroy me instead?" "I thought, if you were gone, if you couldn't deny the charges, the insurance would pay, and everyone would be satisfied. I never meant for it to go so far." "You hired gunfighters," Jeremiah pointed out coldly. "Men who would have killed my wife and me without a second thought." "I know. God help me. I know." Beaumont fell to his knees beside his father's grave. "I've become everything he despised. A liar, a coward, a man without honor." Marshal Hayes stepped forward with his handcuffs. "Beaumont Thibodeau Jr., you're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and filing false federal warrants." As they led him away, Beaumont looked back at Magnolia one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything. You deserved better from both of us." Standing in the New Orleans cemetery with Spanish moss swaying overhead and the scent of magnolias heavy in the air, Magnolia felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried for 3 long years. "It's finished," she whispered. "Yes," Jeremiah agreed, taking her hand. "Now we can go home." But as they walked toward their hotel, Magnolia stopped suddenly. "Jeremiah, yes. I want to do something before we leave, something I should have done years ago." "What's that?" She smiled, her extraordinary beauty now free of shadows and fear. "I want to visit my family's old church. I want to light a candle for my brother and my parents, and I want to say goodbye to the girl I used to be. Then we go home to our mountain, and we live the life we've built together. The life where beauty isn't a curse, where truth isn't dangerous, and where love is stronger than fear." As they walked through the twilight streets of New Orleans, hand in hand, the last of Magnolia's ghosts finally laid to rest. Notice the figure watching from the shadows: Connor O'Malley, his pale eyes following their progress with cold calculation. But that's a story for another day. For now, Jeremiah and Magnolia Steele had won their battle against the past, and the future stretched before them, bright with promise. Their love story had begun with a sack over her head, a desperate auction in a frontier town. It had survived curses and bounty hunters, fraud and conspiracy, the fear of others and the weight of old sins. And in the end, it had triumphed, not because her beauty wasn't dangerous, but because he'd learned to see past the surface to the woman. Beneath she'd learned to trust that some men were strong enough to love the whole truth of who she was. The mountain waited for them. Their cabin nestled among the pines, where a woman's extraordinary beauty could shine like starlight without fear, and where a rough mountain man's gentle heart had found its perfect match at last.